Sure they can fit that into Artemis Gateway somewhere. So I make it, well, it's on time, my time. What is it, 12 o'clock Pacific time? So shall we get started? So yes, welcome to IETF 111. This is the first session on the Monday morning, well, Monday lunchtime. So yeah, if it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong today. So this is the DTN working group. Normally, if this is an in-person meeting, I would say something like, if you're in the wrong room, you want to be down the hall for wherever. But I'm assuming you've all dialed in intentionally. So yeah, welcome to 111 working group. So a couple of admin things to go through first off. Ed and I are your co-chairs. Hopefully you can see our video at the moment. The agenda I'll actually put on screen in a second. Important things to note are the participant guide. There is a URL there for you. If so all these slides are available on the data tracker. So you can get to the DTN working group data tracker. You'll find all this information, and the slides for the other presentation are there as well, including the links to the METECO participation guide and how to report issues if you have any general purpose issues with the IETF meeting in general. This is the Note Well. Hopefully those of you who have attended previous IETF meetings will be familiar with the Note Well. This covers privacy, IPR, and all the usual things that an organization needs to have in place to protect yourself, itself, and others. Please make sure you read and understand this if you haven't read a Note Well before. There's obviously some references to the in-depth information behind what is covered in the Note Well, and I strongly suggest you read these things if you haven't before. So our agenda for today's meeting. We have a reasonably light agenda, but it's filled up at the last minute, so I think we will cover all 2 hours. So we'll start off, well, the administrivia from the chairs is sort of ongoing as we speak. We've given ourselves 10 minutes, but it may not take that long. And then we're going to go straight into continuing the discussion that took up the first half of our virtual interim, which occurred 8 weeks ago, I think, where we were discussing the rechartering of the working group. And I'll let Ed cover that in some depth, which I think is straight onto the... Yes, okay, so some final bits of administrivia. METECO can struggle sometimes. It's got really good recently. We keep saying this on our slides, which is a bit unfair on poor METECO because it's pretty good. We need minutes taken, please. Adam, our group secretary, is attempting to take some minutes, but there is the Kodi MD minute-taking facility built into METECO. This is a collaborative editing tool, so please help out. I happen to know Adam is somewhere in North Dakota at the moment and has fairly dodgy connectivity. So if you spot him missing something, please feel free to edit yourself. Equally, names are a classic because people always say their own names quite quickly, expecting everybody to know how to spell it, and they often get typed up wildly incorrectly. So if you spot your own name being mistyped, please just correct it as soon as you see it. That would be great. The other thing is the mailing list. I'm assuming you are familiar with the mailing lists. If not, dtn@ietf.org, and if you wish to contact the chairs about anything, dtn-chairs@ietf.org. The main business of the IETF working groups happens on the mailing list, so please subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And if you have frequently, for those who've not attended meetings like this before, if a discussion is starting to consume our time, we will use that inevitable phrase of let's take this to the mailing list. The mailing list is the perfect place to really chew over long, complicated things and have a good discussion where people can take their time, read an email, ingest it, and then reply at length. And that's where the main work of the working group really happens. So those are the URLs there. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Ed because he wrote the following slides and he can present them considerably better than me. I'll keep presenting, Ed. Just say next slide when you're ready.
Oh, no worries. Thank you so much. So At the interim meeting, we spent the first half really trying to understand how we were going to approach the remaining work or the next set of work coming into the recharter. As we all remember, the initial set of work was to take the bulk of the information coming out of the DTNRG, out of the IRTF, and give it that refresh because it had been out at that point for probably 8 to 10 years. We've done that, with BPv7, BPSec default security context, and the TCP CLv4 convergence layer have now all made their way through the various levels of review. And when we went back to figure out how do we recharter, we found that there were a couple of different ways in which we've collected information over the past few years that we wanted to continue working on. And we thought that a good way of approaching this was to break things out into categories. And the reason we wanted to break things out into categories was to help explain to ourselves, to the area director, and to the IESG why we might have several things on the working group list, but why we feel that they would not overwhelm the energy and the motivation to work on all of them in the working group. So we had generally 3 different categories. The first is, are there things still that came out of that initial body of work in the DTNRG and the IRTF that we wanted to continue to refine and adopt in the context of the DTN working group in the IETF? The second is, what are the new protocols and capabilities that we know need to be discussed in this working group as part of the operational deployment and maintenance of DTNs? And the third is, are there new things which are variations on a theme that we have already done, such as defining extension blocks and convergence layers, which, while they are not new and otherwise unprecedented? So if we then were to go to the next slide, then that is exactly how we've laid things out. Things that we see as revisions coming out of the DTNRG seem like they might be perhaps aspirationally less working group intensive, because it is adapting prior work, prior algorithms, and bringing it sort of up to speed with what has tracked over the work we have done in the past several years. Extensions to new work, defining new extension blocks, defining new security contexts, perhaps defining new convergence layers, is also seen as somewhat less working group intensive because we're not starting from scratch. We do have definitions and examples of what all of these sort of smaller contributions should look like from a working group perspective. And then the brand new algorithms that come up, really truly extensions to new capabilities, we think is going to be the bulk of the working group tasking if we just look at the overall effort. Now, that's our best guess. We'll see how that goes when we actually get into working group reviews and AD reviews and IESG reviews. But that is how we've interpreted these initial categories. So then if we go to the next slide, we took a lot of the discussions from the mailing list and from the interim working group, and we started categorizing those work items in these different ways. Coming out of the IRTF DTNRG revisions, there was a question as to who is going to update and standardize LTP. We originally had this in our working group since the interim meeting. I believe that CCSDS might also be adopting standardizing LTP. And I think one of the things that we should make a determination on is whether we want to be working on that in parallel with CCSDS, or whether we remove this from our charter because another organization, CCSDS, would be standardizing it, and honestly may prefer and be more of a user of LTP than some of the community here. But the second is to really go back and give a review of essentially custody transfer for reliable bundle delivery. We removed that from bundle protocol version 6 as part of standardizing bundle protocol version 7. And now we do need to go back and understand how we maintain that sense of custody transfer, which is, of course, something that was bookmarked out of the information coming out of the RTF and why we listed under that category. The extensions to existing work, we have a very well thought out and far along COSI BPSec security context, which is an example of another security context. We have some discussion on bundle and bundle encapsulation, which is defining another convergence layer. We have some extension blocks, like a quality of service indication for bundles, which would be in an extension block. And we have already some initial definitions of extension blocks. And then we do have that completion of service identifiers, from our original charter. Next slide, and I believe last slide. And then finally, what are the truly new things that we're trying to tackle? And these are where we think the bulk of the working group work is going to be as we try and make those decisions and designs. The first is the asynchronous management of delay-tolerant devices, networks, or applications. The second is a naming and addressing architecture. I think that trying to solve the complete set of problems associated with naming and addressing once and for all is a great 20-year endeavor. And I don't think we're going to completely solve that problem in total. And I think the starting of this is scoping the problem, understanding the problem space, and understanding the pieces that we need as we make incremental progress. And so a naming and addressing architecture is our first step along that very long path. And then finally, really understanding some of the architecture of naming and addressing can then start to inform neighbor discovery, which is, we think, the other and third sort of large new piece of work for the working group. That set defines what we believe are the working group items, rationalized and justified by the categories. So that's what we took out of the interim meeting and the discussions we had seen so far on the mailing list. I'd like to pause here. Rick, if there's anything you'd like to add, or otherwise, if there's anyone would like to add by coming up to the mic.
One thing, which was a discussion which happened on the mailing list today around alternative methods of reliability as a lighter weight alternative to custody transfer. So my off-the-cuff thought was whether if I jump back 2 slides, oh, there we go. So we have under the IRTF DTNRG revisions, custody transfer for reliable bundle delivery. The question is whether actually, given there's some interest in other ways of implementing reliable bundle delivery by perhaps updating some of the notification messages or extending some of the notification messages instead of a full custody transfer protocol, or however you wish to describe it, whether that more generic work item is worth having rather than saying we will work on custody transfer. That's not to exclude custody transfer, but it's whether that point should be more generic or not. That arrived today. I haven't really had a chance to chew it over, and I'm interested in what other people think of it. And Scott is in the queue. Go ahead, Scott.
Microphone is not necessarily really good here.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, good. Just 2 thoughts on this. One is that the term custody transfer and the concept of custody transfer, I believe, actually originated at JPL about a zillion years ago. A guy named Ed Greenberg came up with it while we were looking at doing CCSDS file delivery protocol. And the concept of custody transfer is a little bit is a distinct.
Oh, he's gone. Oh, he's back. Start again, Scott, if you can hear us. We lost you temporarily. You were delayed and disrupted. Is he going to return? I might turn my camera off to see if that saves a bit of bandwidth. Scott, can you hear us? Ooh.
Better?
Can hear you now, Scott.
Okay. All right. So the concept of custody transfer, originally the idea was as the data is making its way through the network, at each forwarding point, that forwarder says to the thing before it, I've got this, you can let it go, I'll take care of getting it from here. And that continues end to end. The custody transfer implementation in BPv6 was a way to do that, but using reliable convergence layer protocols between nodes is likewise a way to do that. So I think that the custody transfer as designed in BPv6 was problematic and for a number of reasons, and we removed it from BPv6. An adaptation of that is in what's being proposed as bundle encapsulation, and I think separate from that and not in conflict with it is this idea of Felix's for aggregated status reporting. So what I would just suggest here is that custody transfer as a work item in terms of developing a new protocol, I would urge us not to do that. I would urge us to think about it in terms of the concept of custody transfer and what the best way to accomplish it would be.
So are you suggesting that the work item is to work on reliable bundle delivery?
Actually, because Felix's concept is not actually about reliability, it's because it leaves the question of retransmission up to the sender. It's
okay. Yeah.
It's more in the way of I would say more broadly, it's about signaling.
Okay, so can I turn the question on its head? From what you've just said, it sounds like you don't have any interest in revisiting the BP version 6 custody transfer mechanisms and trying to forward port them to BPv7. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think we made the right decision in removing it from BPv6 and essentially migrating it into bundle encapsulation.
Yeah, and this is I think that's a key point here, which is it's not completely removed from the ecosystem. Some of that retransmit responsibility can be delegated into BIB.
And other reliable convergence layer protocols such as TCP/LV4 essentially accomplish the same thing as custody transfer. That is, they
I would disagree there, Scott, because
Okay.
a reliable convergence layer will guarantee, within some constraints, a delivery of a bundle along one hop, across one hop. But if you are an end-to-end, if you're an end system trying to understand whether the bundle you are sending to some faraway endpoint across multiple hops without knowledge of the convergence layers used between you and the final destinations, but you still care about whether you can stop retransmitting or should retransmit or discard the bundle from your local store because somebody along the way is going to guarantee its retransmission, or that multi-hop path problem can't just be solved with convergence layers.
I agree
just
with
over
that.
a single hop.
I agree with that, but I think that multi-hop problem is a mission creep for custody transfer. I think it's a bridge too far for custody transfer for a number of reasons. One of which is if you don't know who's going to take custody of, who is supposed to respond, how can you know how to set your retransmission timer to know that it's not going to go off too early or too late?
Okay.
Right. So there's a concern there, and I think that concern needs to be addressed. What's the actual requirement and what's the best way to do it? I would not propose to revisit BPv6 custody transfer to accomplish that.
Okay, so I've made a note that we will look at that line on the screen right now and reword the idea that there is interest in working on reliability signaling for bundle delivery, but remove the words custody transfer because they're loaded with the BPv6 context. Is that sensible?
I think that's perfect. Yes, I think that's exactly right.
I see Oscar in the queue. Go ahead, Oscar.
Thank you. one detail. Some time ago, in an exchange with Scott, I also talked about the concept of custody transfer servers that could, in case of excessive load of the transmission of the bundles, uh, could keep a storage of the bundles to be retransmitted to the intermediate or final endpoints. Well, that kept in a discussion that we didn't follow up, but I think it's an important point that in some occasions, systems that we work on could be very useful.
Oh, I think we're all agreed that use case is something that DTN really ought to be addressing. But I think Scott's point, and I agree with him, this is Rick with his chair hat off, that Bundle Protocol version 6 custody transfer had known problems, and taking a step back and looking at what are we trying to solve here and what mechanisms do we now have in place with BPv7 that we can use to deliver it, such as bundle and bundle encapsulation. There may be a label switching option here depending on pros and cons for security. There may be just some very lightweight notification changes that need to be changed or need to be added. So I think the general topic I'm hearing an interest in. Does anyone want to jump to the mic and say, no, this is nonsense, we shouldn't be wasting time on this? Or no, we don't have the bandwidth or interest to work on this? Just, I want to hear a counter voice if there is one. Go ahead, Fred.
A different subject. I'm coming in late and I see that you have the LTP bullet up here. What was the verdict on LTP? Was that decided to become part of the working group materials?
Actually, no. One of the things that came up was, since we originally put this in, I believe that the CCSDS has said that they want to also standardize LTP. So after Rick asked the question about custody transfer and reliable signaling, I was going to ask the question as to whether we should remove LTP from our charter because it is already in the CCSDS charter.
And Rick with his chair hat on, no objection to that at all. I mean, if there's another SDO that wants to do the work, and as Ed said in his intro, which I think you missed, Fred, LTP seems very space focused. So if CCSDS wants to run with it, that seems very sensible.
Can I respond very quickly?
Of course.
We're seeing applications for LTP also in the terrestrial domain, not necessarily just the space domain. And the reason we see that is because we see LTP as being a viable protocol for disrupted environments where latency isn't so much the main problem as much as disruption.
Okay. So I happen to know you were one of the people, you've got a personal draft on LTP updates, or did it morph into a UDP CL? Sorry, I need to actually go back to the data tracker and look at this. The LTP fragmentation personal draft you put in, would you be happy to continue working on that? Do you think that has relevance and interest to us?
I believe so, yes. But within the context of LTP, it's looking at ways you can do fragmentation in such ways to produce the best performance given the the amount of data that's presented to the LTP stack.
So that's building on top of an LTP implementation that needs to be uplifted from a BPv6 world to a BPv7 world. The question is really, are you willing to take on that work, or do you know people who might? Because
actually, you're reading my mind to a certain degree here, because that's where I intended to go next. Is what about BPv7? And if there needs to be someone to champion moving LTP forward to BPv7, I think I could have my hand up for that.
Okay, so Ed, what you were saying earlier was that the CCSDS had an interest in doing that as well. Do we need to liaise with them about this?
I think we do, but my question back is, how much of this is the work that we would do in this working group for an LTP convergence layer versus the work of standardizing LTP as a protocol?
Well, perhaps that might be the way to what's the expression, to split the problem in two. There's a nice expression I've forgotten, where we sort of pass LTP to CCSDS and say, go for it, work on fragmentation for it or whatever, and we will standardize how to make a BPv7 convergence layer using LTP as an underlying protocol. Fred, you still have the mic, so if you have a comment.
I would like to step back, actually, if Scott has something he'd like to say. I don't know how to step back, though.
I think I have to click a button.
Oh, actually, I think I did it.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. I like that idea a lot. And certainly the adaptation of using LTP to support bundle protocol in a convergence layer is something that belongs in this working group. It's certainly fine for this working group to undertake LTP standardization as well, but I think it makes it more complicated because of the need to reconcile that with what CCSDS is doing. So I would propose that the LTP protocol specification itself be left as a CCSDS work item. I'm pretty sure Boeing is able to participate in CCSDS meetings, so I would suggest sort of doing it that way.
Okay. That sounds reasonable. And again, if anyone has any major objections on that one or any further comment, I'm tempted to say take it to the list because I'm watching the clock. Does anyone have any comments they want to take to the mic about any of the other proposed things on the charter which are pretty similar to the outcomes of the virtual interim? One of my takeaways from the virtual interim, particularly on this slide, was to add neighbor discovery, and there was a comment made about service identifiers, which I know Mark Blanchet was really keen to find the time to work on. We've sort of mashed that into naming and addressing, because not only are you naming and addressing endpoints, you're also naming and addressing the services at those endpoints, or are services just a sort of a subset of endpoints within the taxonomy. So that doesn't mean we have excluded service identifiers. We've just sort of merged it all into what on earth is a name, what is a location, what is an address, therefore, etc. But does anyone have a pet project that has occurred to them between the virtual interim and now that they would desperately like to lobby us to include? The reason I'm saying this is that when we recharter and state these work items, these really are the focus for the working group. So people contributing individual drafts on other topics, they are unlikely to be adopted into the working group if they're not really work items. So we are making the commitment to work on these things at the expense of other things. I can't see the queue, I'm looking at slides. Any takers? Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left on this subject before we move to our first presentations on our agenda. Ed, do you want to add anything?
No, Rick, I think you covered it quite well. It is just to reinforce the idea that as we adopt drafts within the working group, it is to adopt those drafts for things that map to the work items in this group charter. I did just want to point out that some of the things that are here being included in the working group charter had existed only as personal drafts prior and have matured quite a bit over the past few years. So if there are personal drafts that come up while we are working against this charter, that is evidence for them perhaps being included in the next rechartering when we are through this set of books.
Rather embarrassingly, we have missed an item off this list, which was key management. So I know Fred and Scott both had a personal draft they put in IETF 100, so some years ago now, on distributed key management. Scott, Fred, are you going to find cycles to work on this? Do you think it's something we're ready to tackle yet, or are you happy to let it pass for a bit?
This is Scott. I'm very invested in that. So yeah, I will find some time to work on it if the working group chooses to take it up.
I think I'd be interested in assisting you if you'd need some assistance on that.
I think it's really interesting work if we've got the bandwidth. Very interesting. I'd be very happy to peer review.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. Yeah, absolutely.
I've made a note of that, Ed.
No, great catch.
Yeah, you and I have been through these slides and this charter text about 17 times over the last 6 weeks, and I can't believe we missed it. Anyway, there we go. Right, so bang on time. I think we're on to our next agenda item, which obviously I'm showing a slide, so I can't. What's next on the agenda, Ed? I can't see. My screen's full of Meetecho and other people's slides.
Next on the agenda is just a 10-minute overview of where we are with the default security context update. Rick, if you're already set up for screen sharing, do you mind sharing the screen?
Don't mind at all. I've got all the tabs open. Let me just find out which one it is. Asynchronous management architectures. Updates on the default security context.
Yep.
Yep. Perfect. Your title says something completely different, Ed, which is what has confused me. Yes, I wish to share my screen. There's so many buttons to click. Yeah, look at that. There we go.
Okay. We can skip over that and go to the next slide.
There we go.
So if we recall, we were putting together a package of documents for the standardization of BP version 7. We realized that we needed BP version 7 and a convergence layer and also a security protocol associated with it. And that 3-tuple was needed to go forward through IESG review. In the course of that review, we also were required to provide a set of default security contexts associated with BPSec to provide some initial education and description on how we thought the security concept would work. So we started these as a set of interoperability security contexts, and then we migrated them to instead being operational default security contexts. And that is what this document was meant to capture. We got up to version -07 in mid-May of this year. We received some AD comments associated with updating things such as scope flags and clarifying how we would be handling authentication tags using the AES and GCM. We then, just a few weeks later, generated a -08 draft in early June that was submitted to IESG review, and we received several comments back again. And then we produced a -09 and then shortly thereafter a -10, which at that point captured all of the discusses associated with the default security context. Where we are right now coming out of IESG review is we have 2 yeses, 10 no objections, and 2 no record of opinion. So that is enough ballot positions to pass. And I just yesterday put forward a -11, which incorporated the last bit of non-required editorial comments for the default security context. At this point, the claim is that -11 is now ready to go forward. We made a decision that we did not think that the changes that were made to this document were of significant technical change, normative change, to require another working group last call. The vast majority of changes were editorial in nature, to include adding CDDL definitions and adding test vectors and so on to just help implementers. So if we go to the next slide, we can start parsing out what some of those changes are over the next 3 slides. The first is really there was just a couple of editorial changes. We had to fix some typos in bit values in our use of terms for CBOR types. We wanted to make sure that we were using the correct and most up-to-date references for some of the cipher suites. There's a preference that IETF, a minor preference that IETF cite IETF documents if they cover the same material, so we updated those. And then we helped point back into BPv7 and BPSec in the citations just to help a reader unfamiliar with the overall ecosystem know where to look if they wanted more information. Next slide. Then there were a couple of normative changes that were made, and 3 of them essentially. The first is that in the default security context, concept, we allow the ability for either the message authentication code, the MAC that's generated with the HMAC-SHA security context, or the authentication tag generated with the ciphertext and additional authenticated data to be to specify whether you cryptographically bind those activities with other elements of a bundle. So for example, you could include a primary block with the plain text over which you calculate an integrity signature. Or you could include the primary block with other additional authenticated data when you generate an authentication tag in AES GCM. Similarly, we allowed optionally to include the various elements of the target block header as opposed to simply the target block type specific data, and the same for the security block header as well. In all of that, the comment that came back from the security area review, and they are correct, is that in order for this to be more secure, we needed to actually include the value of the flags in the plain text or in the authentication data itself. And there were certainly reasons for that that were compelling. And so now that set of data includes the 2 bytes, the 16 bits associated with those flags. So that was a normative change in how we constructed that overall set of plain text that we are signing or additional authentication data when we are encrypting. The second normative comment that came out was requiring us to be more specific in how we would choose to transport encrypted keys or encrypted key material. And we selected by negotiating and working with the various area directors, in particular the security area director, the use of AES key wrap as defined in RFC 5649 to say this is how we will be encrypting keys when we carry encrypted session keys. And then the last is there was a request, and we saw that it was a reasonable request, that the authentication tag, certain cipher suites in AES GCM will produce ciphertext and authentication tags as separate elements in the API. And the question became, some conventions require or prefer to place the authentication tag, either prepend or prepend it to the ciphertext and have that combination of ciphertext and authentication tag replace the target block's block type specific data field. Alternatively, some constructs is to treat those 2 pieces of data differently and have the ciphertext replace the target block plain text, but then keep the authentication tag as an independent security result carried in the BCB itself. What we determined was that to make various reviewers so happy with this, the authentication tag security result is made optional. If the security result is present in the BCB for that target, then that security result holds the authentication tag. If, however, that security result is not present in the BCB, then the authentication tag is merged together with the ciphertext as part of the group of information that has replaced the block type specific data in the target block. We thought that all of these were relatively small changes, although they were normative changes. And I don't think that there was much sort of discussion around that we should not be doing them. Next slide. And then there were a fair number of informative changes. The sense coming from many of the reviewers is that as a definition, as a specification for how to provide and populate BCB and BIB security blocks, there should be a fair bit of guidance and almost educational material in this document to make sure that we do not receive naive implementations. So we certainly clarified things about not being able to use the same keys across different security contexts, even when you were doing key encryption. We added some examples of how to remove the BP CBOR encodings when generating canonical forms. There were really quite a bit of clarifying text around handling the authentication tag, as we just spoke about, and then an awful lot of guidance pointing to NIST documents and other documents. Padding is not needed for keys. when we are using various cipher suites, how do you make sure and why do you need to make sure that IVs are unique per invocation IVs, whether or not implementation should have constant time comparisons when verifying integrity, looking over the upper bound and the number of distinct encryptions and the number of AES blocks that should be covered by a particular key before that key is not used anymore. An example of the deterministic construction of unique IVs as recommended by NIST for AES GCM, things of that nature. Additionally, we've added a section 5.4, which is guidance for designated experts, to provide some guidance on how expert reviews could look for the changes as requested to IANA to add additional scope flags if that is something that needs to be done in the future. And then we added really quite a large appendix, Appendix A. I put here 21 pages. It almost doubled the size of this document. And it is full of examples of security block processing of BIBs and BCBs individually and together with various targets in sample bundles to help educate on how this all comes together. And then lastly, Brian Sipos was kind enough to provide an example CDDL definition for the IPPT and the AAD structures, which are really the only structures that are uniquely identified in this document. Obviously, the main security block document, or the main security block structure, is defined in the BPSec document itself. And having that CDDL, we thought was just a nice bit of clarifying text. So in all of that, there were a few editorial changes, a very large amount of informational changes, and very specific and targeted normative changes. And from that, we think that the security contexts are good to go out through AD review and then out into the editor's queue. So with that, let me just pause and see if there are any additional questions, comments, or observations about that. I see Zahed is in line.
Hello, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Sorry for being late. I was having some issue, and this was like login problem, but at least I'm here. So first of all, I just joined the queue just to say, I mean, the work done on the ISG review process by you, especially you, Ed, and other authors, was tremendously appreciated by the rest of my colleagues in ISG, and it has been these responses and how the comments have been appreciated. So thanks for doing a very good work. I promise to go through all the changes during this week, and hopefully after this week we'll go ahead.
Can I add a big thank you to all the ISG reviewers who really did drill into what is quite a tough document to work at. Yes. If you don't have a security background, and if you're coming cold to the whole of DTN, this is a tough one. I have a question, Ed. The CDDL has some real advantage here. There's no CDDL in BPSec, is there? And we're a bit late for that, aren't we?
There is currently not. I would actually say that I think that there will eventually be a version of CDDL that allows for unadorned CBOR sequences, and I would rather publish at some point a more normative CDDL across BPv7, BPSec, and some of the security contexts at a time when we have better representations of those unadorned sequences. To save some space, we are using CBOR sequences right now in BPSec that just aren't modeled very well in CDDL.
Okay. And also, we probably don't want to start editing a document that's in the editorial queue for the RFC editor as well. So, yeah. So I think that is, unless there's any more comments on this document, that is your 10 minutes up, Ed. And next up, is it you again?
No. I think next up is Sarah Heiner. So the last thing I'll say on that is it was a tremendous amount of work getting these documents done. Alex White and Sarah Heiner helped me with that as well. So as you read through those 21 pages of test vectors, understand that Sarah was one of the people that was going through all of that and making sure it was done well and done correctly. So don't thank me, thank Sarah and Alex.
So thank you. In which case I'll stop sharing this. Sarah, are you there? Sarah, would you like to present your own slides? Does that help?
Is it possible for you to share them?
It is always possible.
Along with my computer.
I know where the buttons are now. Doesn't mean I necessarily click them correctly. I think BPSec policy architecture, is this the right one? Yes, this is the right one. Can you see that? Just shout next
Yep,
slide
looks
when you want
good.
it. As a
Okay,
note,
great.
Ed, while
Thank
I'm
you.
presenting the slides, I can't see the queue. So Ed, shout if somebody leaps to the queue, and I. Okay. Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
So hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Heiner, and I work at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, where my focus is DTN security. And I've spoken to you in the past about the need for security policy for BPSec, and today I want to take that topic a bit further and present a potential architecture for that security policy. So I've added a couple discussion points to this presentation, which I think we will take offline to the mailing list, but feel free to jump in at any point if you have questions or comments for me. So as we've gotten BPSec out the door, I think that one of the next steps here is developing security policy to start building that user base for BPSec. So with the security policy architecture that I'm presenting today, a user has the ability to take full advantage of the features and capabilities that are included with BPSec. But then they also have the ability to configure and tailor security to operate in the way that their specific mission or project requires. Next slide, please. So with that quick motivation, I'm going to try to cover several pieces of the proposed security policy architecture, starting with design principles for that architecture, and then moving into a data model that we developed at APL for the policy, and then move into supporting details for that data model. Next slide, please. So we'll start with those design principles. We know that security policy has to support both syntactic and semantic interoperability. So we need the ability to represent security policy in the bundle in a way that can be understood by all nodes that are processing that bundle. But we also need to implement consistent and deterministic behavior as a result of the application of policy. Our policy design is also accounting for the need to operate in this resource-constrained environment and is applied with block level granularity, since BPSec affords us that same level of specificity. Finally, our policy architecture takes into consideration the need to be both flexible and customizable to accommodate the different abilities of the nodes that will deploy it. Next slide, please. So we'll begin our discussion of the policy architecture with this data model. So you'll see through the middle of this slide that there are 5 major components that are interacting to implement policy. So I'll go into detail for each of these components, but first we'll talk through how they are interacting. So reading from left to right, a bundle is first matched to security policy rules, and those rules are identifying the security processing role for the BPA. So that's either a security source, verifier, or acceptor, and then also describes the required security operation that's applied by that BPA. And those rules are then matched to event sets, which are composed of security operation events, which we're using as the processing points for policy. So we can associate those events with one or more processing actions, which specify the actions that the BPA will take, which ultimately impact the bundle as a matter of policy. Next slide, please. So the first component of that data model that we want to discuss in depth are security policy rules. And you'll see here that they are made up of 3 criteria sets: filter criteria, specification criteria, and event criteria. The filter criteria specify the bundles to which the rules are matched, as well as the blocks in the bundle that are impacted by the application of that rule. and the role that the BPA has to assume in order to apply that rule to the bundle. The specification criteria provide details on the security operation that has to be applied for that rule. So that's defining information like the security service, security context, and any parameters needed to establish that context. And then finally, the event criteria in that security policy rule is what allows us to associate the rule with an event set, which is defining the events that processing actions have been configured for. Next slide, please. So this is quite an eye chart. So some of the statements that I'm going to make here, you just have to take my word for. But we use the events in the security operation lifecycle as the processing points for policy. And across the top of this lifecycle, I would say you can see, but again, take my word for it, the lifecycle is driven by the processing role of the BPA. And our claim is that this lifecycle is finite and unchanging. It's capturing all the success and failure events that could occur during security processing, with failure events including the identification of a missing, misconfigured, or corrupted security operation. So using these 13 events, we can configure reactions to the occurrence of them using security policy. Next slide, please. So as promised, some discussion points to sort of force me to take a breath here and solicit comments. I've included 2 questions about the completeness of the security operation events, which might be great points to take offline if you're interested. First being, are the security failures that I have listed captured sufficiently? So is there a security failure that does not fall into the category of a security operation being classified as missing, misconfigured, or corrupted? And then on the other hand, are there events in the successful path that need to be included? Right now, the way that we identify success events is the identification of 2 different events at the processing node. So there is the identification of the BPA role. So those would be events 1, source for security operation, 4, verifier, and 9, acceptor for security operation. And then a second event occurs to show the success at that node. So the security operation is added at the source. That's number 2 in this list. The security operation is verified or it's processed at its acceptor. So the question here is that level of granularity in those events sufficient to identify the role and then acknowledge the fact that the security processing has been successful at that node? I see someone in the queue.
Oscar, go ahead.
My question is, your analysis is based on the bundle specifically and not on the content of the bundle. Did you
I'm so sorry, I missed the
Okay.
second part of your statement.
Your processing is based on the bundle and the origin, destination, it is correct, misconfigured, and all that, and not on what the content of the bundle specifically. For example, if I am transferring some kind of instruction, an XML or whatever inside the bundle, inside the protocol, you are working on the bundle on the outside of the bundle, to say it that way.
So there is some processing of the bundle contents, the representation of the security operation within the bundle would be the security block. So we get as far as identifying that security block is missing or its intended security target block is missing. To say that it's misconfigured, we could have a parameter that was specified incorrectly, whether it's traveling within the bundle or if it's specified by policy at the processing node. So there's an inspection of the bundle contents that contributes to the life cycle.
Okay,
but
so
I agree that
so the bundle could have some kind of checksum or something like that that could be identified. Let me ask you about my concern specifically. I've been working in medical records for many years, and I've been working. I have more than 1 million analysis clinical tests transmitted. One of the situations is that all this structure of a clinical test should be complete and trustful, and you can trust that in the other end. For example, in the case of a space medical record in the space by a doctor that is on Earth, or so. Your points are very, very interesting for me. That's why I am asking. So what is the level of
so Oscar,
yeah.
Can I clarify? So
Yeah.
I think what Sarah is doing with this work is, so a bundle contains payload and metadata. So this policy framework is addressing the metadata contained in a bundle to verify that the transport characteristics, the security characteristics of that bundle are correct, but it's not examining the payload content. That is for an upper layer process.
That was my question at first. That was my question from the beginning. So we are talking about the structure of the bundle, specifically.
Not the payload. Yeah.
Not
Sorry.
the payload, perfectly. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. No problem. Carry on, Sarah.
Okay, great. So if there are other comments having to do with the completeness of the life cycle, feel free to take it to the mailing list, and I would love to hear any other comments that anyone has. But moving on to the next slide. So I've just presented 13 different events. Obviously, there are many configuration options for security policy. So to simplify that configuration and to give it the strength of supporting some sort of default security policy configurations, our security policy architecture includes the concept of an event set, which can hold multiple security operation events and the processing actions that are associated. So by naming an event set, we can reference it by multiple policy rules, and we are supporting a generalized response to security events by naming and reusing these event sets. Next slide, please. So the final component of this data model is processing actions, which are used to perform the actual response to those security operation events. So we can classify processing actions as falling under one of three categories: block manipulation, bundle manipulation, and data generation. And these processing actions are required, optional, or prohibited for different security events. So on the next slide, this is another chart that might be a bit difficult to parse, but what I want to call out here is the abundance of optional processing actions. So in the leftmost column, the 13 security operation events are enumerated down the side, and the processing actions are in the row across the top. And these blank boxes show a prohibited processing action. The letter R is for a required processing action, and the O's are for optional processing actions. And at each O, that's a point at which we can configure security policy. We can enable or disable that particular processing action for that event. Next slide, please.
I see Rick is in the queue.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it was a very quick clarifying question. You said on the previous slide, and because I have control, I can jump back. Bundle manipulation and block manipulation. Can you just clarify what you mean by that? As a manipulation of the processing of a discard the bundle, discard, ignore the block, or actually editing the bundle in flight sorry, question.
Yeah, so perfect question. If you go forward, I guess 2 slides, that's exactly what we will talk about.
That's fine. I shall wait for the answer then. That's fine.
Okay, perfect. So just beyond that, that large chart are the definition of bundle manipulation processing actions. So when we are applying a bundle manipulation processing action, we are either modifying bundle transmission or the contents of the bundle itself. So for bundle transmission, this would be the failure of bundle forwarding. So you are ending bundle transmission at the processing node. And then to modify the bundle contents, this would be the retention or removal of blocks within that bundle. So we can remove the security operation, which is represented as a security block. We can remove its target. We can retain that security operation within the bundle, and then we can also remove all of the security targets operations. Does that get us closer to an answer? Or maybe once I address block manipulation actions as well, that'll be enough detail. So if that is the case, next slide, please. So with block manipulation actions, we are changing the contents or the processing of blocks themselves. So we can do that by modifying or temporarily overriding the block processing control flags, which can impact block replication, status reporting, and the preservation of the bundle or the block that we are changing that for. So currently we're supporting the ability to override the security target blocks, block processing control flags, or the security block representing that security operation. Next slide, please. So our final category for processing actions is data generation, which allows us to either generate a bundle status report that carries a user-provided reason code, or allows us to store the bundle as is at the current processing node. So the intention of these processing actions is to create information that could be used for later forensic analysis, maybe to understand what caused the underlying security event. So I will pause here for comments on processing actions. And if there aren't any, I'll move on to the final 2 slides here. So this architecture was a lot to ask you to wrap your head around in 20 minutes. So I want to highlight the initial implementation of this proposed architecture in ION. APL added this initial implementation to the ION 402 release. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested in getting a feel for this security policy architecture to download the latest version of ION to give that a try. And then on the next slide is additional information on security policy. So again, look at that implementation in ION. There is a YouTube video showing a sample configuration of security policy using the BPSecAdmin tool in ION. We've included a user's manual, and then we've put out several papers and talks on BPSec policy. So if it is something that you are interested in getting more information on, I'd be happy to send any of that your way.
Go ahead, Rick.
So what?
I shall pause a second for my audio to kick in. Thank you, Sarah. This is fascinating, and yes, you did answer my questions earlier, so thank you.
Okay, great.
I have a question about whether the policy is in band or out of band. I think, from what I understand with the way you've structured this, you're looking at policy is configured on security enforcing nodes out of band, so pre-configured or administratively configured through some other channel. Have you considered if the policy that should be applied to a bundle can be attached to the bundle itself? Does that even make sense?
That's a great question. We've taken a look at taking a hybrid approach to security policy. So allowing some of that information to reside locally at the node, include some of the policy information as parameters for the security block. And I think that ultimately taking a hybrid approach there and allowing at least some of that security policy configuration to travel with the bundle will be the approach that we need to take here, supporting somewhat of a hybrid.
Okay, and I like that approach. A follow-on question: have you considered generalizing this beyond security policy and looking at sort of how this interacts with AMP and the ADM system as a whole as just a sort of a management piece? So rather than security enforcing, just handling corruption or misconfiguration in a general sense, such as I happen to know that these sources of bundles should all have bundle-in-bundle encapsulation involved, or some extension block must be attached for policy reasons. Or am I now just coming up with ideas beyond the scope of your current work?
I do think that this interacts well with all of the network management work that is going on, and I think that some of the metrics that this security policy architecture poses tracking would be useful outside of just the realm of security. So I definitely agree that there are other directions that we can take this, hopefully.
Thank you. I'm watching the time. Oscar, I see you're in the queue. Can I ask you to be prompt,
Sure.
because we're eating into your presentations?
We were chatting with that about interfacing this model with the testing plan that we have been developing at IPN6. So very interesting, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate having the time to present.
You're very welcome.
So no, Sarah, that was tremendous. Thank you so much. My final question on this is, how do we see this information coming forth in the context of the working group? Certainly we have enumerated actions, enumerated policies, enumerated sort of structures and approaches here. Do we see this as an informational RFC? Do we see this as a normative RFC? Do we think that it can be generalized enough that it is the foundation for implementations that can be separate and have their own take on these? I would just ask Rick for you, or just the working group in general, what do we think about the future of this work in the working group?
Okay, so my gut reaction is to respond with a question, which is, if this was to be taken on as a working group work item, what is it standardizing? So if there is a proposed configuration of policy mechanism or format or way this is transported around the network, sort of why I was asking about the in-band use case or the hybrid solution is great, then yes, I can see that being something that the IETF could standardize. The alternative is to say an informational architectural document, a BPSec security policy architecture. That's we're still discussing charter items and have we got feature creep, but yeah, if people are working on this and want to bring it to the IETF, we shouldn't be the ones to say go away. So that.
And I
Go
just
ahead.
want to let you know, Scott is also in the queue.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott. I'll stop talking.
To say that I have the same feeling that if there were an element of this that required specification of protocol that needed to be tested in between interoperable implementations, then doing a protocol specification would be a straightforward way to capture this. But absent that, I think an informational RFC does sound like the best idea to me.
Yeah, so the IETF does standardize best practice documents. And if it is the considered opinion of the working group that this sort of security policy framework could be considered best practice when deploying security in DTNs, then that would be something that we would obviously would be in scope for the working group. So anyway, I'm watching the clock. Can we take this discussion to the list?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. One last quick one, and then I promise I'll be quiet eventually. If some of the value of this work is that it enumerates in like an IANA registry, certain actions and policies and so on, is it possible to have an informational RFC that specifies IANA registry items? Because I think that would be sort of the perfect combination for this, because what's standardizable is defining these particular events in ways that everyone can agree on how they are referenced. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to jump the gun here. We've got another couple of presentations turning up about asynchronous management and standardizing asynchronous management data models. So if the security policy mapped to an ADM, then the document describing the security policy events, and registering those relevant ADM URIs, URNs, that is a document that is on charter and appears to standardize and define something.
Well, with my chair hat off, I think that's brilliant. Thank you.
No, never. I'm not brilliant. Don't call me that. Right. Thank you very much, Sarah. This is brilliant. And I'm trying to find the agenda. Yeah, thank you very much for that. So straight on to asynchronous management architecture, as if it was planned. So I will stop sharing that. Aha.
Hello, hello. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can. So are you happy to present your own slides, James?
I can do that. It's not asking me which screen I want to share. By chance, do y'all see anything?
We see you.
Hi. I've clicked the screen share request thing. I don't know if someone has to.
Oh, I have to grant. There we go. Try that.
Do you want to share your screen? Yes. Even ask which screen. Excellent. Almost like Zoom. All right. We'll switch this over. All right, you should have a full screen now, and it looks good.
Yes, it
All
does.
right. So howdy, y'all. My name is Emery Annis, or James, if you want to be boring, I suppose. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, first, the asynchronous network management architecture, sort of what is that vision, where we are, how things are going. and then talk to you a little bit later about some of the naming that y'all were just teeing up. So thank you for that one.
So Emery, before you get too carried away, we've eaten a little bit into your time. Well, I will blame Sarah, but actually it's our fault. So can I ask you to be prompt, simply because we're losing time. Anyway, I'll shut up then.
Absolutely, can be done. So I guess one of the first things I kind of mentioned here is, look, this concept of asynchronous management architecture, the different pieces that we're using, including ADMs and the asynchronous management protocol, these things they're actually in work today. They're showing up in both commercial industry. They're showing up in both sort of open source and sort of playgrounds between different universities and so forth. So what we're really trying to do here is push this through the next step. Let's get the different components standardized, and then let's ask the community, all of us, is it correct? Are there missing pieces and so forth? So with that said, just to kind of remind everybody, if you aren't familiar what is the asynchronous management architecture, the idea being that for delay tolerant networks, right, I don't have necessarily nodes that are online, with what I can send commands to and pull information from, right? So what we're really trying to do here is look at the concept of, can I pass controls to my agents, the things that I'm trying to manage on the network, from the managers, and then can I wait asynchronously for them to send me reports or send me data back? So that's sort of the high level view of what is the asynchronous management architecture. One of the key pieces to this architecture is these the application data models. This is what sort of defines the controls, the reports, and any associated parameters or information that are going to and from the managers. So kind of where we are today, I think back in April 2021, so this year, the current draft form of the asynchronous management architecture went through the working group last call. Received some comments. One of the biggest comments on that was, hey, it's kind of written today as a network management informational spec, but could it be for more? Could it do, applications or systems themselves? I think that's very true, and I think we need to, ask ourselves, how do we rewrite the document, or what modifications do we need to make to allow it to do that? My opinion on this is definitely that AMA should be generic. Your ADMs should define the applications or the things that you want to manage, kind of like we're talking about for security and policy. And AMP, the protocol, should define the functionality between those agents and the managers and the expected behavior. So kind of a very high level, this is where this started, right? I think it was a very space-centric delay-tolerant networking use case, but we have come a long way, and I kind of proposed a sort of straw man use case here. Like, could we use this asynchronous management architecture to actually manage something like IoT in a smart city, right? Where you might have a vehicle that needs to travel around and send commands to nodes as it gets within proximity to those nodes. It wants to collect data and then bring that back and sync to maybe a master node somewhere. So very DTN-like, if you will, and you kind of think of all the things you can start to manage that goes well beyond the network, right? The actual applications themselves, the systems, the system behavior, the information that you want to put on the wire, the security parameters for those. So very much, we should think about extending AMA today to these various use cases. So I think, sort of my ending slide for talking about AMA is, these are some of the things that I think we need to do as we kind of push this, coming out of the working group last call. Let's make sure that we clarify the bounds of network management. There's lots of talk in AMA today about autonomy. So let's scope that function of autonomy. What does it mean? What are sort of the bounds of autonomy? Going back to that particular use case, and there's been also conversation about sort of consensus or federated control, right, which requires things like actor to actor or manager to manager communication. I think we should talk about how to define those components. Does an agent actually need to be managed? Let's clarify the scope of those application data models that fit within the AMA, and make sure that's very clear, and so forth. So those are some of my thoughts coming out of here. Let me open it up to the room and answer questions. I think Rick Taylor is in the queue.
In pretty quickly. This sounds a little bit to me like you want to reopen the AMA document, take it out of working group last call, and revisit it to say this is more than network management. This is, as is in the title, asynchronous management architecture. It's about managing things, not necessarily performing network management.
Well, let me.
Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Just Ed. So I think that was the one comment that came out from the mailing list in reference to the working group last call, is that the vast majority of the AMA document as it exists now does not focus on network management, but generally application management, with the idea that the application being managed is an application responsible for configuring and controlling the network. And that if there are a couple of places where you simply remove the word network, then that is a relatively small change, at least to the structure of the AMA, and isn't more of a larger change to the structure in the data model.
Understood. Okay, I'm going to preempt what I think Zahed's question is going to be. And the answer is yes, we have been around all the netmod and netconf and future network NMRG within the IETF, trying to attract them with this work. And we have failed to garner any interest. So it is still resident in DTN, because this is the working group where we care about disruption and delay in transmission, and an end-to-end round trip in order to take actions on your devices is not something we expect to exist. But otherwise, go ahead, Zahed. I probably preempted the wrong question.
It seems like you are brilliant at like gazing my mind. So I have very, I mean, you just said what I wanted to say, but I wanted to add that one. Well, I kind of thought like if you want to look into more application aspects of application configuration management and other things, and you're gonna go beyond this DTN network. I mean, then this has to go through a couple of more things, right? So I mean, that's one thing that we should be thinking here. I would say,
and we're
like,
very happy to. We really are very happy to.
Yes. Yeah. So my thinking is like, well, if it is going beyond DTN, then definitely we need to think about where visit the routes again and ping other people. Because if you go IoT, if you want to address the IoT use cases and think to RG, get some comments from them or something like that. So if you really want to do that, this has to go a couple of places again.
So, well, agreed. I think when we say outside of DTN, the question there is, what we mean is trying to understand how applications are behaving across a DTN. And that still seems to be sort of a very niche focus. And the thought was that other areas would provide review as requested, similar to the security review for a security protocol internal to DTN. But as Rick said, when we've talked to others about any of this kind of management, it is just so different from the problems that they have because they're not operating in this environment, that they felt that they would feel more comfortable providing review after the fact.
That I can understand, but if you in this document try to open up this more general asynchronous management for IoT, say like if you want to address the IoT network and you define IoT, I mean the definition of IoT can vary, right? So I mean then we need to really cross-check like whether we are doing the same thing. Is there any other solution that can fit here, or we're providing something else? If it is DTN, I completely agree with your comments, Ed. Like this is about a network is quite different from others and has a value of its own. So that's what I'm just pointing here. I'm pretty sure you guys are well aware of what's going on other places.
Yes, understood. But understood.
So I'll go back to my original question about working group last call. do you believe, Emery, that you can address the overuse of the word network that was picked up on the list, and to make it a little bit more generic and clarify a couple of these points, keeping the document in last call, or do you think you're going to make changes which we should probably take it out of last call, let the working group chew it over, and last call it again? What I'm assuming you're offering to do this work.
I am I'm here. I'm ready to help. No, I think it's actually very close. I think there's just a final read to make sure, you know, some of these things are clear with regards to the scope of what it should manage. I think that is a very simple change. I think with regards to the sort of informational AMA, something like, is it clear the scope of how a manager and a manager should talk to one another? I think those are minor modifications. It's not necessarily changing the words or the architecture in general. It's more clarifying the roles and the relationships of these different pieces in there. So
okay, so Rick with his chair hat on, I'll do you a deal. We will freeze the last call on AMA. You do your revisions, and we will reopen the last call, and we'll make it nice and long, so that people can give it a good chew over, just to make sure that they agree that you haven't made enormous normative changes to the. I know it's an informational document, so there's not really normative text, but we'll let other people double check that you haven't radically rewritten it at the last minute of last call. So yeah, no, thank you for offering to do the work. I don't mean to be strict about this, but we have to be a little bit careful about process. But thank you for volunteering to get this through, because this is last of our current charter items that we need to get done. So, conscious of time, I think you're doing the next presentation as well. So I think you're eating into it. Am I right?
Possibly. Let me see. This is the one right here. If I share
URI URNs was what I have.
Yep, naming of asynchronous management models,
okay.
Which is exactly ARI, URIs, ARIs. So, kind of to set the stage for this one up front. You've heard about policy. You heard me just talk about AMA and so forth. You heard me say that these are being operationalized. One of the key pieces, one of the critical pieces to really, you know, making this work in that operational context is the ability to address those objects in the network, being able to address and, you know, the parameters within the network, being able to sort of have an idea for how, like I just mentioned, there's many different ADMs that might apply to each agent. So it's very important that we have a scheme that I can use to address those different pieces. So talk about that. These slides are a bit long, so I'm going to roll through a few of these pretty quick. Then we can kind of get to the discussion at the end. Can always talk offline for either stuff in here or just in general, how should we do this? So kind of as a high level, some of the things we didn't mention so far, you know, network management in IETF is currently documented in 3 ways, right? There's the AMA, you just heard about that. That's sort of the aspirational, why we need to do this. There's the asynchronous management model, application data models. These are the ADMs that actually define how do I manage a sensor versus a network versus you know, the actual maybe structure of VPv7 or something like that. The actual sort of not the encoding, the format and the different objects and object types within that. And there's actually the sort of AMP encoding today. What's interesting is the naming and addressing for these different objects is actually defined in 2 of these 3 today. So I think one of the big pieces and the point for this discussion is maybe we need to extract that and create a separate RFC specific to how we should address these different components. Here's just a high-level picture kind of showing that, right? Your AMA at the top, your ADMs and AMPs sort of supporting the AMA and sort of a set of ADMs that already exist today. One of the things that I wanted to say here is kind of setting the stage for why this is definitely important. If you look at some of these agents, so here's spacecraft, maybe even ground stations are agents, they're going to sort of subscribe to multiple ADMs each, right? So no single ADM is going to be applied to a single agent. There's probably many depending on the complexity of that agent. Some of the content of the ADM as defined today, so there's very specific set object types. So, your literals, operators, controls, the variables formed from those, macros, reports, and your different rules that you want to apply to it. Kind of coming back to the concept of DTN, one of the big pieces here is I can't, send long strings of data, right? I should be able to reference very clearly a piece within the ADM, and the most, the shortest way possible to reference that I want to change this variable on this particular agent. So I need a way to name that and address it. So kind of speaking up front, it's actually stated in the specs, every object needs to be uniquely identifiable. And by the way, we recommend that you use the ARI, which is actually kind of a formation following the URI schema, to name those. And the ARI is written in the spec today, says it's composed of 3 things: namespaces, objects names, and parameters. Namespaces, the most formal one being moderated namespaces, this is essentially following your ADMs. So the content that says manage this BP agent, manage the security on this BP agent, a very structured, standardized set of content, being your moderated ADMs. But there's others, right? So there's informal. This might be your vendor or mission specific configuration, right? How would I reference those as part of my DTN environment, as well as anonymous namespaces. For your moderated namespaces, I kind of took a snapshot of a few of the objects within the current ADM agent draft that's out there. You can see here's that ARI formatted with those 3 things: your namespace, your object name, and your parameter. Here in the metadata of that ADM, it explains, okay, here's your namespace. So this is what that would look like. Here is a EDD on that. So now I could look at the object and the name. And here's a control, which is parameterized with, in fact, additional ARIs, so a set of ARIs. So this kind of speaks to the challenge and why we need to very clearly name those, right? So instead of, so I need a way to reference those so I can pass those in. And even further, one step further, the currently AMP protocol specifies that I need nicknames for those. So again, instead of sending you this crazy long stream of an ARI, which is comprised of a collection of ARIs, could I not use enumerated nicknames that describe the same thing? So here I took this ARI AMP agent control and so forth, and I kind of shortened it to just numbers, according to sort of what's been offered in the specs today. So both of the specs, they don't say how it should be done, but they say that it should be done, that we should actually have a registry for each of these. So I think the question for this conversation is, all right, I think we should create a new RFC for these. We need to represent both the namespaces as well as the nicknames for each of these. And maybe it looks like something like this. Maybe you've got, kind of going back to that picture of, backwards. Coming back to that picture of that structure of my namespaces and so forth, maybe I have this top A being an IANA namespace. Maybe I have this top B being a SANA namespace that captures those different ADMs, or that captures maybe even the dynamic registration of vendor-specific information. So to open the floor to discussion, here's some of the question: is moderation of namespaces and nicknames possible? Kind of as described, the need, is this possible? And then if it's possible, what's the approach to that, right? How do we handle those anonymous and informal namespaces? How do I handle things that don't really fall into something that you're managing, but it's mainly content on the network, like services and information flows? How do I manage things that aren't even content on the network, but maybe are aspects of a protocol, like the PDUs and BPv7 or so forth? And then how do I manage that dynamic piece? So I went as fast as I possibly could and probably confused everyone, but that was my last slide. I open it to the floor. Questions, comments?
Thanks, Emery.
So I'll jump in and ask sort of the simple question of, if we wanted to register a URI schema, Is the idea then that we would produce a small draft that says this is how the naming would go, approve that, and then put a schema against it?
Registering a schema is reasonably simple. We are the IETF. We can write a specification and present it to IANA, and that should be fairly simple. Personally, I think a document which just describes a URI format without describing its use seems strange. So perhaps the ADM specification should include section 3, URI, with an IANA consideration section saying, we wish to register this URI. This is the specification that describes its format and its use. So a standalone document seems strange to me.
I see Oscar in the queue.
Is this schema registry has been thought about that?
Can you repeat the question? Say again, Oscar, please.
Maybe we take this one to the mailing list.
Yeah, I'm watching the clock. Oscar, you're eating into your own presentation time. So yes, this is an interesting discussion to take to the list. I will need to do some background reading on URIs and URNs again, and also look at how the Yang netmod netconf guys also approach this problem, because they have names for the various parts of Yang data models that are uniquely identifiable. And I need to read up on that, because there may be some answers in there. But thank you very much, Emery. That, again, was deep content. So, running slowly out of time, next up we have the IPN-SIG pilot working group, who wish to just update us on what they have been doing in terms of compliance testing and other things. Go ahead, Oscar. It's Ronnie, not Oscar.
Yes, Ronnie, and Oscar here. Are you? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. You have a bit of feedback, Oscar.
Okay.
Oh, it's better now.
Better? Okay. Well, my name is Oscar Garcia. I am the group lead of the IPNC Pilot Projects Working Group. Let me see if I can make this somewhat bigger. Well, we've been working with the working group in several topics during this time. The last time that you were updated was by Alberto Montilla. So we are going to move forward in several topics that we've been working. Helping me is Dr. Ronnie Bull of Utica College, that is a group member and has been a member of this working group of TTN for a long time. Let's see if this works. Well, we have been working in several issues in the last times, and we have been working now in a DTN testing plan. The background of that, we started on September, last September 24, in conversation with Vinton Cerf and Scott about testing DTN, and we developed some testing and design a model to determining endpoints in an Earth environment, and tested bundle transfer between cloud servers with the ION software, with the utilities PP and PP Echo. The concept then evolved to the development of a tool that could be integrated and simple to use in end-user environments. On November 27 last year, we made the first DTN communication between cloud servers between Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud by Dr. Larissa Suzuki, myself, and with the help of Vinton Cerf. And we launched the pilot project working group this year on February 1st. We started writing the DTN-BP cloud connectivity testing and network reliability and stability plan. With contributions of Vint, Cerf, Alberto Montilla, Scott Burley, Lick Togerson, Samo Grasic, and Ronnie Bull, well, in several countries around the world. Last February, we developed by the part of this group is a Spatial Corporation, the DTN work on network management that allowed the processing of a contact branch generator. Now, automatically, we make testing with contact routing and the exit node implementation. We also, in our group, the group of Sweden that is working in the Arctic, make interoperability test between LoRa DTN. They develop an app that works in mobile and is also connected to ION ETN and with Raspberry Pi connecting remotely from the Arctic to our network. So this was developed by Samo Grasic. And this group that is working following reindeers in the middle of the Arctic. Last May, also a project of the IP&SIG group was with the European Space Agency. Testing was made with a satellite that is the OPSAT that was controlled by DTN with interoperability with ION and the implementation of the D3TN DTN implementation, and this connection allowed to connect between Earth and space and also process images connecting with the artificial intelligence software of Google by Dr. Larissa Suzuki, Alberto Montilla, and the group of D3TN, and also was supported by Scott Burley. So we have been working quite a lot in the last month, and now we are also launching the global DTN testing plan with the motto of, we are launching in this meeting with the motto of testing interplanetary internet at home before you go to space. What was the idea of this? That we could develop a software that was of easy usage by personnel not work technical, that could be installed in even in cloud servers or personal computer, that allow the global participation and awareness about DTN, and that it need to be easy to configure and use, that could be multi-point, that could allow interoperability and compatibility testing, that could process automatically, that had low power and connectivity requirements and could be adaptable to different implementations. Our development environment has been Linux standard tools. There's a Windows version also planned. We specifically, Ronnie Bull modified the source Ion tools in C code. We generate the back office processing in PHP and MySQL or MariaDB, and reporting and graphics daily and monthly with open source tools. On last May, we made first testings between a very less expensive laptop connected from our members in Argentina to our cloud servers in the United States, sending bundles, exchanging bundles between both systems, and connected to home connections. Well, the development team has been myself, Oscar Garcia. I've been 35 years developing and deploying applications. The C programming was developed by Ronnie Bull, who has been for 30 years working. He's a PhD in computer science. Well, bash programming, you can see there. The group has been testing, Facundo Novica and Daniela Caula. We made also the documentation. The development time was supported by Digital Health Information Network and Utica College. It's around 2,000 lines of coding. It's going to be with a Creative Commons license in the end user products. We plan to distribute this with the IPNC global participation that, as you can see, is 700 plus is 8 something members around the world in all the continents. This is a concept model that we developed that is connecting with DTN several environments in different areas, and generating from our central server or servers, because we are setting more than one, reports and information about bundles lost, well, every information that could be generated from this. The implementation, I will show you some screens about this. There's a back office system that we have developed to manage all these systems. We also developed, this is the client menu that the user has in each computer. The idea was that for an end user, it was quite complicated to test this kind of sending bundles. What we basically do, sending and receiving bundles. So we developed a menu system that could set up all this very easily in most computers, as you saw before. The configuration is quite simple. You set up all the different. They are not so much parameters that need to be updated, and then the system starts working. Here is a screen of the working system where the one server is connected to all the other servers in the network and sending and receiving bundles. All the results are stored in very simple files in each computer and then uploaded to a central server. And from this uploading, we generate the information, and all this process can be set up in the cron tab, so automatically the system starts working. For example, our servers are working now all the time. You start them, and they'll start sorting the information, processing between them, and sending the information. From the results of this processing, each one of the participants receive an email. The processing is produced 3 times a day, and you see how many bundles have been received, lost, and all that. And there are report options in our central servers that you can see what server received or lost bundles. For example, here are some examples of processing and reports and graphics that we can generate for this information. And there is a part infrastructure that I would like to talk about a bit. If you wish, Ronnie.
Oscar. I'll be pretty brief for the sake of time, since I know we're getting short here. So what I've developed at Utica College with the help of students, and going forward, I'm really going to try to get more student interaction in with this. We have a node that's connected to the IPN SIG PWG network here called Helios, these are all Ubuntu 20.04 systems. This is acting as our gateway node into our internal network here, which you can see has a basic switch. And then we have a server up on top that's acting as just data storage for all of the nodes that are in that internal network. You can look, we have an HPC eMain cluster that we're standing up here right now. The first node here is running ION, and it's connected as node 42 on the IPN. Oh, go back to the thing, the previous slide, Oscar, if you could, please. Yep, and then we have the multiple nodes on the other end that are all eMain servers connected in a cluster. Now, what I've done is all these servers can actually be on the physical node network, so they're nodes internally that we run up in eMain are all virtualized on a virtualized network that I can bridge in or not to the internal network. So next slide, please. Again, these are 6 servers we're doing right now, Ubuntu 20.04. One of them is acting as that endpoint server. The other one is acting as shared NFS storage. We're also going to start doing some network and systems monitoring, where we can actually look at things like overhead on contact graph routing. We can look at overhead on how large the network's growing and seeing what kind of statistics we can gather from that from the logs. Next slide, please. So each eMain cluster node currently we've tested is capable of launching up to 200 virtual nodes. And you can see in that chart there before, we had 4 eMain nodes listed together. We could go higher than that. It really didn't push the load average much on those systems, just running up the nodes as is with ION on them running. If we were to actually add more load to each individual node, that would, cause that node count to go either down or up, depending on what the load is on each individual node. These servers aren't anything great. They only got about 32 gigs of memory running Xeon processors. I'm looking to upgrade in the future. So just some basic items here. They're all connected on an isolated network with a single IP as a gateway node. We have virtual eMain networks and nodes can be bridged to the physical backbone network. So we can actually build this huge overarching internet, if you will, inside, gatewaying out to the IPN. Virtual eMain nodes can be arranged in clusters and regions. And I know Scott Relay was looking at some of this to start testing things like bundle and bundle protocol and other contact graph routing solutions. And there was a few other bullets there you could look at later on if Oscar provides the slides for sake of time. So everything else here, we're dealing with an automated framework in eMain called the Python ETCE. It's Python 3 based, allows us to automate node configuration, setup, and topology. Doesn't have to be run as root. These scripts can be kicked off as sudo with sudo privileges, so we can actually allow registered users on this network and be able to deploy their own DTN implementations and see where they can go with testing on it. Automated configure, startup, shutdown of applications on the nodes. So say I want to start up 100 nodes, I want to have ION running, and each node is going to have some sort of different configuration. Plus maybe I have some other processes going on there, like image processing and sending. All that stuff can be configured at startup with the ETCE framework. And then we can also automate the data collection process at the end. So I will hand it back over to Oscar to finish up. There's no questions on that.
Well, we can set up the question to the end of our presentation. Finally, the idea and it's operational and finished, mostly finished now. The DTN testing plan is a complete system with registration form, download the software. There is an installation manual, a user manual, support form, support personnel. We want to give feedback of results to the users and publicize the statistics, so all the members of the group and other organizations can have this information available. Finally, of course, like in every development, there is a to-do list. We need to make translation of the end user to different languages. Incorporate more DTN implementation. We have been working with basically in this stage of the software with DTN, with ION, I'm sorry, but we are planning to set up D3TN. There is also the LoRa DTN and several others that are around. Add more testing functionality, because we are sending bundles back and forth and not much more, but we want to send messages and generate also wider statistics like delivery completion, amount of data sent, the statistics, well, all that. And you know, this is endless once you start doing this kind of, obtaining this kind of information. Well, finally, in the IPNC, not in our group, the strategy working group has launched a report about solar system internet. I was also chatting with Scott, that is in this meeting, and I suggest, by his idea as well, that this can be a topic for another meeting, that Scott and perhaps other members of our group can make a presentation, a more detailed presentation about this. Well, finally, you have the members of the group, the person who have advised all our development group in this project. And if you would like, you can register, send us an email to dtntestingplan@gmail.com, or you can register directly to be part of this testing. You can do that with your server or your personal computer at home. That's the idea, that we are moving forward in this DTN project. Well, finally, thank you very much. I think I am in time.
Well, you're just a couple of, go quickly.
Try to do it very fast.
Thank you very much, Oscar, and really interesting to hear what you guys are doing, and it sounds like things people might well be interested in. So we have 3 minutes remaining for what we had on the agenda as general Q&A. So if there's anything anyone wishes to bring to the mic, comments, things we've missed. It looks like Brian has jumped to his feet. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, I have a really quick status update on the ACME validation document. It only this past week has passed through the AD review, and two major points that came up that I'll get into on the working group mailing list in detail are related to URI naming of the DTN scheme, and the issue with the administrative record type identifiers and the IANA registry. That is probably gonna have to be worked out in detail, the exact way to handle it. The AD is not really comfortable with an experimental document updating a standards track document.
That's
But-
fair enough. Yeah. Do you want to raise it on the list and we'll try and chew it over?
Yeah.
Sorry, we're so short on time. With the agenda always looks empty, and then suddenly we find we're running out of time. The other thing I will quickly raise with my personal hat on, I've noticed in the next session today, there's a group called Webpack who are looking at bundling HTTP requests together and sending them to a server. So I suggest people poke their nose in. It's session 2 today, so in half an hour's time. I have only just spotted them. I don't know what they're doing, but they might be looking for a transport protocol that understands how to move bundles around. So that could be of interest. Ed, do you have anything you wish to add? Because I think we're pretty much done.
Nope, I think we're done. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you to all of our presenters for making this such a great meeting.
Yes, thank you very much. I think really, really interesting topics from all sorts of people. Let's get this charter done. Ed and I will work with Zahed to just get it signed off and sealed, and then we can charge ahead with it. And thank you all for attending. Well, I had one other great thought, but it obviously wasn't that relevant. Yeah, thank you very much. I think we're done. So I'll see you at the next one, or speak to you on the list.
Thank you very much.
I now declare this meeting over.